All right. Should we? I guess we should get started now.
It's unmuted. You can try it out. Hello? Okay, yes, it's
hello,
working.
Echo. So can we mute the room? When you're not speaking. So yeah, the protocol is whoever speaks is not muted. I think that is important. And also, if you are not speaking, then you are muted. I think that is at least for the room. I think that is useful because there is a lot of noise coming from there. So welcome everyone. So the protocol for today is that I'm going to introduce the topic for this panel. Then we're going to introduce the panelists very briefly. So only list your name and affiliation just so we know who you are. And then we're going to a list of questions about this. And if you have a point that you want to raise, then please raise your hand. We're not going to go through the panel on every question. And then we'll see how it goes. I mean, it is, we are a huge group. I think this is fun. And it is really a way to get together more than anything else. It would be nice if we can reach some conclusions, but we'll see where we end up. So, right. So, what is the motivation? Of course, we know that COVID really turned things upside down. I mean, I was volunteer to be SPLASH steering committee chair at the end of 2019 at a conference, and before I knew it, we were in the middle of a pandemic, and we were organizing conferences in a completely different way than I knew we were used to. So, and now SPLASH is a hybrid event, and so some people are actually there in the room, so that is interesting. But most of us couldn't be there because, well, the lifting of travel bans only is only next week or so. So we cannot even travel there. But even if that is all over, right, and we hope very much that we can travel to New Zealand next year, and because it would be fun. It is not clear that even when this pandemic is over, that we will go back to normal, right? I think we are used to a different way of operating. We will have the climate crisis upon us. I mean, it is already upon us, and flying all over the world doesn't seem like such a good idea anymore. And also we've discovered new ways of interacting, right? I mean, it would be unheard of 2 years ago to have meetings online with this many people, although I mean it was possible, but we didn't. And so we need to think about how do these things work? What is the future of conferences? And so we're going to explore some scenarios, right? So we can have online conferences as we were used to in the past year, and we'll. Not ideal, but yeah, it has some advantages too. We could have regional events. We could have maybe present local to you, and then maybe do broadcast. We could have a big international SECPLAN event. I mean, that has been proposed in the past already, and maybe we should do that, even if the intersection between the events is not so large, supposedly. We could have some combination of or hybrid events as this SPLASH is. We could combine in one international SECPLAN event with online events. I mean, so there's all kinds of combinations of these ideas possible. And but an important thing that we is that we want people to meet, right? And so today I was in the department, and I'm back occasionally, and I'm meeting people there, and I cannot remember for some people, for most people, whether I actually last met them in person or on Zoom, because, well, it is weird. And And so how is this going to look like? And we don't know the answers, but we can speculate a little. And I think there's positive things about this online setting as well, right? I mean, you can meet people without having to fly all over the world. It can be much more efficient. There can be more time to discuss and so on. And so what we're going to do is we're going to have you introduce yourself, the panelists introduce yourself, name and affiliation only, and then we'll discuss. So, Stefan.
Hi, I'm Stephen Cowell from King's College London.
Sophia.
Sophia Drosopoulou, Facebook and Imperial College London.
Sriram.
Sriram Brown.
Dave.
Dave Grove, IBM Research.
Room. We'll see you later, hopefully. Well, okay. In the room we have Jonathan.
Jonathan Aldrich, Carnegie Mellon.
And Manu.
Hi, Manu Sridharan, University of California, Riverside.
Ural.
Görel Hedin, Lund University, Sweden.
Tony.
Tony Hosking, Australian National University.
Alex.
Alex Patanian, Victoria University of Wellington in New Zealand.
Amal.
Amal Ahmed, Northeastern University.
Yanis.
Yanis Maragdakis, University of Athens.
All right, and that's all the panelists. And so there are other people who have joined us on Facebook or on what is it, Zoom. So please do, because we welcome voice contributions to this discussion as well. So the question. So the first question, I think, is this all temporary, and are we going to go back to normal? I mean, to how it used to be. Any opinions?
We're never going to go back to how it used to be. This is an easy one.
Okay.
I was going to say the opposite. So it's not so easy.
You mean it's not so? It's not so easy.
In 4 years, we will have forgotten about all of this so thoroughly. It's like it never existed. Just like the Spanish flu.
Uh-huh.
But then we'll have the climate crisis. So we probably will end up somewhere in the middle between now and way back when.
That's different, yes.
I think there are two questions. One is, will the pandemic be over? And then we are not knowledgeable enough to know. The Spanish flu says, yes, it will be over, but many scientists say, no, there are too many mutations, we travel too much, it won't be over. And the other thing is that our unique opportunity, our last chance to do something about climate change, use this to secure our children's future.
Alex?
So it's kind of been different experience when you are not there physically, when you join a virtual only conference versus the hybrid one that you are doing right now. When it was virtual, you felt like everyone else was finding time in between other things to join in and sort of interact. When there is actually a knowledge that there are people physically doing this actively for 8 hours or something like that, it is actually quite a different feeling for people joining on this hybrid virtual mode. There is definitely a lot more of a feeling that there is a conference going on, say in this case in Chicago. There is definitely different feeling when you look into that hybrid table. I don't know if anyone tried it and look into the coffee room where people gather in the breaks. So I don't think physical will go away. It definitely, even for virtual attendees, it creates that vibe that you just don't get at all in any of the many, many, many virtual conferences that we've done. It is the improvement that you may not feel as guilty about not attending when you can't physically travel. That hopefully will happen, especially with people being in remote places, which is applied to me and Tony. So there is progress there, but I just cannot see us going virtual only, even with climate change and other things addressed.
Right, but I mean, virtual only. I mean, maybe for big conferences is not an option, but we definitely have learned this new tool of virtual meetings, right?
I think you have already answered part of the question that we were going to discuss. You just decided it's not going to go back to virtual only. Perhaps we should get first more opinions.
So I think
you're muted.
Oh, yeah. So I'll say sort of the obvious thing, which is, well, at least in my opinion, virtual sucks, right? And the reason that it's really bad, it's not that, so, you know, we who are on this panel and who are speaking are senior people, and we already know each other and we know the community. And therefore we can sort of afford, you know, some time, maybe we can even afford forever being virtual. But what I'm really sort of afraid about is what happens to the future generations that we're trying to train. They are not going to get what we have, which is the sense of connection, right? I mean, the reason I love being an academic is I feel like there's a global community and I've met all of you and I've had conversations, and they need to have that. Otherwise, they're not going to stick around, to be honest, right? Like we will have attrition. So I think virtual only is not an
online,
answer.
we're not having those conversations?
No, I don't think we are. It doesn't lead to a sort of personal, accidental one-on-one that leads to some amount of trust building and some amount of, you know, you just sort of have this wonderful technical conversation. Even if you think about, you know, the Q&As after each talk, there aren't a lot of people there, right? It's not like a normal conference where you certainly had more people paying attention and interacting and coming to talk to you afterwards in the coffee break. Or just sitting next to you at dinner or lunch, right? Accidentally. We've lost massive amounts of connection. So I don't know, my personal preference, maybe I shouldn't be answering at this point, would be maybe we should have one massive in-person event a year so that we can all travel just once, because we did travel too much before. And then maybe we should switch to smaller workshops. Maybe we shouldn't like rely on large conferences for personal connection, smaller regional workshops where we actually go workshop, we build personal connections, and, you know, and we can keep doing some of that, keep participating in those, perhaps in hybrid ways as well. But we need some in person every year.
And you were
if I
saying
can speak
so-
as someone who's, you know, from the in-person side of Splash, it's, you know, it's just completely obvious to me after a year and a half that this experience I'm having here today, even with, you know, a third of the normal people, half to a third of the normal people at Splash, is totally different, right? I feel like I'm back in conferences, and I feel, you know, like I just wasn't before. So, you know, I would totally agree with them all. But I would also like to say, I think I agree with Giannis in a sense as well. If we don't do anything, we will go back to the status quo, right? I'm not totally familiar with everything that Popl is doing, but Popl is kind of looking like it's going to be in person with an online workshop, right? So, you know, who knows what PLDI will do, what other things will do. But I think if we could take advantage of this to make a change, but it's not just going to happen. It's going to happen because someone says, no, I want to, you know, I want to try one big SIGPlan conference, as Amal suggests. Or like us, right? I mean, this is why we did Hybrid Splash. We wanted to say, hey, we can do a hybrid conference. It's not going to be perfect the first time around, but it's actually the only thing we can do with an in-person option in November. And we want to try it. We want to start figuring out what makes it work. You know, we'll see what happens after the whole thing's over. But I've talked to so many people who are delighted to be here. I think it's wonderful, you know, for all some glitches that we've seen, it's wonderful to see that people are successfully participating. You know, we're having this joint conversation. And I'd love to see other people kind of pick up the ball and say, you know, maybe you won't run it exactly like we did here at Hybrid Splash, but exploring new and different models than the ones we had before.
So can I ask Jonathan, because it's a hybrid conference, so it's different from the previous physical ones. So how do you experience the online presence there? Is that like well, there are some screens in the corner, or is that felt, or?
I think it's definitely felt. You know, there's a stronger connection with those who are here in person. I think that's just inevitable. But we do have the hallway, you know, a place in the hallway where people can and do connect in, and we see them as in the breaks because the food is right there, right? And so we see them, we come over, we talk. You know, at the talk, some people are presenting virtually, and some of the questions come virtually, right? I think my best experience with hybrid was in workshop Patra. We had about maybe half to 2/3 in person and half to 1/3 online, depending on what part of the day it was. And we smoothly went back and forth between virtual talks, in-person talks, and conversations. Part of why that worked was it was small, smaller than the big talk presentations. And so we just did everything on Zoom. But I felt like that was actually a hybrid experience and a really delightful one.
Okay.
If I can just jump in very briefly, I just wanted to reinforce Amal's point that, you know, I've been here for a day and a half, and the number of PhD students who I've spoken to and heard about their projects, learned about the exciting work that they're doing, is just completely, I mean, there was almost zero of that for all the virtual conferences that I attended. And it's valuable for me to learn what's going on, but it's so valuable for them. It was valuable to me as a student to meet people and get practice doing my pitches. And for one reason or another, it just hasn't happened nearly as much in the virtual conferences that I've attended.
So Ben Chung, Northeastern University. I sort of want to push back against something that Amal said, and that something that she emphasized was that in-person events would be sort of workshops that are much more regional, where you'd meet and where you'd have the opportunities to do meet and network. And I think though that getting back to the sort of last point that was made, that would sort of, in my mind, obviate the point of the in-person conference to some extent. Coming here to physical Splash in Chicago, the thing that I noticed the most versus the virtual setting is the networking. It's the ability to go and meet people you never would have met because they're physically distant, because they're intellectually distant, because you just would not have had an opportunity to network with them in a virtual setting. Where I think that the virtual setting does really well is when you already know someone, when you're in the same research area, when you know who they are and what they do, and you want to get sort of a better idea of what you already know, in a sense. I think then that if we are to have sort of split physical virtual, the way to do that then is to emphasize these strong points. In our physical events, we should be trying to get sort of as many diverse people as possible into a room and really emphasize less the sort of technical aspects and more the hallway aspects. If we do physical conferences in the future, the way that I see it is that we should sort of structure them fundamentally around the hallway track. The hallway track is really, in some senses, what the physical conference is incredibly good at, and what we haven't really been able to duplicate in the virtual setting. Then virtual events, I think, should try to emphasize at least what I see as the strength of a virtual conference. You should have a bunch of people who are in a single research area, who are experts in some topic, and probably either know of or personally know each other. You get them all in a room, and then they'll happily yammer on for a long time on highly technical topics. Have longer presentations that go deeper and leverage the fact that the people in the room are experts, that sort of thing.
Right.
I just wanted to clarify that, yes, Ben, I totally agree with you. Like the thing I said before the workshops is what I'm much more serious about. One massive SIGPLAN event, perhaps, so that you get mixing from across all of the different communities and the ability to kind of, just have people who are accidentally going to run into each other. But I agree with what you're saying.
Right, and the point of such a big event is to run into people, right, and not so much the technical content. But the question is, what is the excuse to go there, right? I mean, that is the because the current excuse is I have to present my paper, and I want to go to Chicago to hang out with some people I don't know is a is a bad incentive to sell to your department chair, right? Your role.
Yeah, I definitely think that doing the physical conference is really, really important, and not the least, for young researchers, PhD students and so on. And the challenge is, of course, that we at the same time want to keep this flexibility and how do we make sure people actually come to the events when there is a possibility for seniors to participate online. So we definitely need incentives like you have to go there to present your paper, for example, so that departments will pay for the travel. One thing that I think we should keep, even if we go to physical conferences, is the videos, which I think is a great raise in quality of the presentations. And even if we have physical conferences, they will play a very important role in spreading the knowledge about the research also after the conference.
So I want to add another point of view from someone participating in person. This is Danny Dick from University of Colorado. So the advantage of I want to say that we are not going to go back to normal. I think we are going to invent a new normal. And Jonathan and others, I think this is the time for us to invent a new normal. In person will never go away for several reasons. One, it's people want to work with people that they know, like, and trust. And organizations and people move at the speed of trust. And it's so much easier to build trust when you meet in person, when you have dinner. Like yesterday, we had a faculty mentoring lunch that Jonathan and myself and Hridesh, the amount of life that people share together at lunch and the openness and the candid conversation that we had, I've never seen that happen in any virtual meeting. And these are people who are strangers that have never met each other. If people have already know each other for a while, it's very easy then to have that connection, that personal connection, because we are just like picking up and building on where we left. But for people that never met each other, to open up and to share so openly about their struggles and to learn from each other, that would have never happened on a virtual setting. So there is no doubt in my mind that the in-person will return. I'm not saying back to normal. It's going to be a new normal. So I think that's why we have this conversation. What should be the new normal and what are the advantages? So from when I talk with C-level executives, what I'm seeing from the business community, people are saying, well, in the future, I'm going to look at carefully, what's my community? Where do I belong? What's the community that this is my home? And I'm going to prioritize to attend that in person. And then there's a bunch of other events that I can attend virtually, but I need to go back to my community to fill up my battery, to charge my batteries, to fill up my tank, to meet my community, my family, my academic family, my community. And once people identify what's my home and what's my family and what's my community, that's the one that people are going to prioritize in person. And the rest, we'll do the other ones we'll do virtual. So that's what I'm seeing. That's how I'm thinking that I'm going to attend in the future.
Shiram?
Yeah, so, through three quick comments. One is, we've talked a lot about climate change and so on, but there's also the very real issue of like excluding people who currently aren't at the table, right? We're all sitting here at the table. We have a place of privilege at the table. As you know, I spend a lot of my time these days in the computing education community, which has two interesting characteristics. One is it's super strong in Australasia. So it is not the case that it's like Europe and North America. And so its conferences are actually required to rotate to Australasia, which is great, right? Because those folks are doing good work. But the other thing that's characteristic about them is they have way less funding than we do, right? For us, it's like, oh my God, it's such a nuisance to fly to Europe 4 times a year. And they're like, you can fly to Europe 4 times a year? Like this, we would love to have this problem in the first place, right? So there are these huge communities that I'm seeing people who otherwise are not part of the conversation. And for that reason, I don't have a strong opinion on virtual versus all virtual versus hybrid. Obviously, we're going to end up doing some kind of hybrid. I don't think that's surprising.
Even in research, you're talking, right? I mean, in research, they don't have these budgets. So
Yeah. These are researchers who don't have these budgets, right? And so those are the kind of people who might be publishing, say, at SPLASH', even speaking of SPLASH', right? And we're not getting to hear from them. And so for that reason, I think it's unavoidable. So there's the climate issue, there's the accessibility issue, the cost issue, all these other things. So that's one point. And I think we keep talking about the climate, which is obviously important, but I want us to point there's a much more immediate pressing problem with like people who are simply not at the table. The second one is, I know we keep talking about graduate students and Amal is absolutely right about we need to bring the younger, the next generation in. I have to say, when I was a grad student, it was super stressful going to a conference, right? I was not like this great social butterfly like Giannis or someone, right? I was stressed out by this. I didn't know anybody. And the people I did know were super intimidating, right? It was like Harper and Felison and people like that. Like, my God, you can't talk to these guys, right? I was just like totally intimidated.
Sridharan Felison was your supervisor. You were not.
I know, that's even better, right? So the point being that it's not like I went to conferences and was just like, oh, I had this like mind-blowing experience. Mostly I just felt like I didn't belong here and I didn't know how to have a conversation. So I hung out with the other grad students who also didn't know how to have a conversation. And we sort of slowly worked our way up the ladder. And now, I guess I'm the one people want to talk to. So I just want
to point staring at all those other grad students.
Yeah. So, we have this sort of mythical view about how this worked. It didn't work that well before, right? And I think we're doing a lot more in terms of mentoring events and stuff like that, which are fantastic. PLMW, all these events, FMT, whatnot, right? Or PLT, whatever. They're all great. We need more of those. And I think there are other ways by which we can try to accomplish some of the same goals while also allowing a group of PhD students who are the least funded people and therefore least likely to be able to be there to get access to all of these channels rather than saying, well, if we don't have physical conferences, how will these people ever get any mentoring? They're not getting the mentoring right now either. One thing I did after a conversation at Sick Plan Cares last night is I said, I'm going to open up to having virtual office hours with students who I don't normally get to meet. So non-Brown students, these are exclusively for non-Brown, and I'm publicizing office hours and people can come. Obviously it's going to be a little tough for somebody to say, oh my God, I want to go and talk to Sriram. But I think that's the thing I'm planning to do. And I would suggest other people consider doing something like that as well. Make ourselves more open to the community and say, yeah, we're happy to chat. The last thing I want to point out, we love to mythologize the sort of hallway track. But what I think we sometimes forget is a lot of the hallway track is spurred by conversations we've seen having and technical talks we've seen, right? Like if we had no talks at all and we had just a hallway track, I think pretty soon we'll all be like A, complaining about our departments and B, talking about like the awesome restaurants in town. Right? Oftentimes what happens is there is some deep technical content that's the trigger for something more interesting happening. And the hallway track on its own is only so interesting and only so good. And I completely agree with Benjamin that we've had these conferences for 2,000 years, if you want to go back to Aristotle or something, and we've had like 1 year and it's insane to dismiss of them. But there is a transition period, gradual typing, gradual conferences, maybe.
Tony?
So I just want to riff a little bit on Sriram because I think we need to ask the question, what is it that conferences give us and why do we want to go to them? And I would say that the biggest piece of it is the immersive experience, the opportunity to drink from the fire hose, to sample this smorgasbord of wonderful stuff that's happening in multiple places at once. You can never get to all of it. But there's some energy in that. And one of the things that for me, and perhaps for those of us who are in time zones that don't align to yours, it's now 3:30 in the morning for me, is that the physical conference gives me an opportunity to time shift. I can't do that time shifting while I'm sitting here halfway around the world on an opposite time zone. I can go to a place, I can time shift for a week and I can get the experience. Can't do it right now.
Doing it physically is pretty demanding too, right?
Well, physically it's demanding, but at least then I've got an excuse to tell my family, to tell my department, I'm not available. I'm not here. And I can't do that even in a virtual setting if the time zones don't align, right? So the time zone alignment allows me to put on the table that I'm not available, that I'm not working right now. I'm actually at the conference. I'm embedded in that. I'm immersed in it. And I think that's an important piece for those of us who are currently sitting in the middle of the night.
Right. I mean, I think what some people are saying, actually meeting people and immersing yourself in the experience is these are important things of physical conferences, but at the same time, we want to allow other people to integrate, right, and to also experience that conference, even if they cannot afford to be there or don't have the time or etc. And so I think that's what we have learned from this online hybrid experience, is that we can have more people join these conferences than we did in the past. I mean, I attended more conferences last year than I did than I would have otherwise, right? Maybe not in the same way. Sophia.
Thank you. I think there was a lot of discussion about the disadvantages of being virtual, and there is no doubt we do have the disadvantages. I think we did not discuss whether, because of these disadvantages, we give ourselves the license to disregard the footprint of traveling. I have not heard this argument. I believe that there are ways to mitigate some of the disadvantages. For example, the people who know each other, they introduce their own students. We do watch parties for the conferences, and so on. I am, yes, I'm not convinced. A lot of people have done wonderful research and have not met. I think Newton never met Leibniz, but they did wonderful stuff and they were writing to each other.
And there was no Zoom in that time.
Yes. And the fact that it has got disadvantages is not, it's just one side of the question. That's what I wanted to say.
Right. I mean, I can say, I mean, in our research group, we hired quite a few people who I only met recently and in real life, but you could perfectly communicate with them before, right? I mean, and actually have meetings with them. And so, yeah. Alex.
So as someone who is also remote, I want to reflect on this physical and virtual thing in a sense that, yes, it is a struggle to travel from here. We don't have money to pay. Basically, it costs us about $5,000 to attend any European conference, probably about $4,000 to attend any US conference. So just to put it in perspective for anyone there, and our funding is probably, I don't know, a quarter of what you would expect to get in either Europe or US or less. So think about that attendance.
But that cost is the same for us. It doesn't sound very different.
Sure. Maybe. I would have thought that people in Pittsburgh going to Chicago would not incur a $4,000 or $5,000 fee, but
well, there's the hotel fee, there's the conference registration, and so these are our major costs, right? So what you have different is maybe a bit more travel costs, but
yeah, the airfare is about $3,000 to Europe and about $2,000 to US. That's the airfare for us. I usually stay in cheap hotels, so for me it was registration, cheap hotel, and airfare cost. The thing is that, nonetheless, I can afford to go in time and everything else maybe once a year, and for most people here, maybe once every 2 years. So imagine people who are in Australia, New Zealand, and probably in Asia, who would only leave their region, and this is not even carbon kind of concern. This is just a normal mode of operation. In education, even less. Sriram said a lot of these people will not be doing as much what would be considered important research by local communities, despite the fact that it's important, and therefore they even have lesser funding. It's really, really hard to get them out. So not having the hybrid component for any in-person event is probably something that will affect us badly. The time zone sync, because I'm also, not as bad as Tony, but still in New Zealand time zone, it is not easy to interact with people when the thing is happening through the day. And by the way, I'm not going to say that I want other people to be in my time zone. I'm actually saying that when the event is spread like that, it is hard to catch the people. I found the events that had the things shrunk into where, okay, you wake up at 2 a.m., you're going to stay up until 4 a.m., but at least you are guaranteed to talk to the people. That actually works for the faraway time zone people a lot better than having an event throughout where you kind of like, oh yeah, some authors will be there, etc., etc. You can put aside maybe 2 or 3 hours of your day, even though it is going to hurt you for 3 or 4 days, but you can't put aside any more than that. So something that we need to sort of keep in mind for these faraway people, lack of money and the fact that the time is going to only work in these really short bursts. That's it.
I love the discussion that's going on, but we have a question here in person. Sorry, it's hard for us to raise our hands and for you guys to see us. So,
hey, this is Max from University of Washington. I just wanted to chime in on something Sharon was saying about the connection between the quote unquote hallway track and the technical content being presented at the conference. And I'm not going to go so far as to deny any connection because I think that would be very silly. But personally, one thing I find myself talking about when I'm in the hallway track, whether it's virtually or physical, is what's next, or what are people doing now? Because that's the question one of the first questions I ask is, hey, what are you working on now? And a lot of times I feel like the things that are being talked about are old news. I saw it on Twitter 8 months ago, or saw it on Archive, and I read the paper already. And I'm certainly finding out new things at the conference. I'm of course not going to say that I'm learning nothing new, because that would be silly. But I think for me personally, the connection might be looser than maybe what Shira was saying.
So I have a question to the room there. I mean, do you feel excluded from the discussion? I mean, so we have this discussion in Zoom, and we have one little window with the room. So how do you experience that?
Hey, this is Manu. I think it's working fine for us. I mean, there's a difficulty with us kind of raising our hand to jump in, but you're on a big screen. To me, the experience is pretty good in terms of being able to hear what you all are saying and getting that message.
Yeah. So you feel included?
I'd say that we felt maybe a little excluded until we realized that we just needed to break in now and then.
Right. I mean, so you could maybe put a student volunteer at the computer and push the raise your hand button when you have a question from the room.
Yes.
We can't raise our hand because we're the host of the meeting. It's just a weird Zoom technicality.
Yeah. I can't raise my hand either for some reason, Echo. So.
Oh, well, break in, Dave. Do you have something to share?
No, I just want to agree that just riff on what Tony was saying. I find I get a fair amount out of hybrid conferences, but I don't get that same level of energy. Like the getting it all, like all this stuff happening more than I can possibly do, and then you come back and you're jazzed for like 2 weeks to do stuff and tell everyone about everything you did. I don't get that from I have yet to get that from a virtual or hybrid conference.
Right.
I do think the technology is good enough that we can have lots of interactions. We can make new connections. That's possible, but you just don't get that. Wow, that was a conference. Bang.
And now back to work. But yeah, Amal.
I just wanted to say that, sort of second Tony's comment about immersion, right? So as senior people now at conferences, students come talk to us and we're immersed. We don't have our families or whatever day to day, I just taught class, for instance, that kind of thing to worry about. So you're just immersed and you give your attention to kind of, the younger people, the people that you don't know, and you get to know them. If we're going to do hybrid and online events, we somehow need to get to that stage where the senior people commit to being there in that same kind of way, commit to having one-on-ones, so that it can feel like the in-person event. Again, personally, I think that having at least one massive conference a year and everyone committing to go to that one thing, if possible, also making that hybrid potentially for people who can't afford it and somehow making it work would be great. But if we could all sort of block off 1 week during our, year, and we're going to go. If we have a paper or don't have a paper, it doesn't matter. We're going to go. We're going to see each other. Maybe that would be a good compromise. And then of course, trying other things on the side. But we somehow, if we're not there, we need to commit, or we need to come up with some sort of virtual platform where we can, Shriram was saying that as a grad student, it sucked, right? We didn't know people, we didn't talk to them. So how can we make this, despite the discomfort, we actually did chat with someone we were sitting next to or whatever, and gradually became more comfortable. So how do we make it so that online or hybrid, the new students, the newer generation gradually becomes more comfortable. Maybe they just won't show up, right? Because it is kind of uncomfortable. So I don't know how to do that really, but it's important.
So maybe we can combine these things, right? I mean, we don't have to do just one thing.
So I wanna add from the room back here. So Danny came from University of Colorado. I think the issue is about commitment, and I heard Sophia and others make like a wonderful argument for why we want to include other people from Latin America or from Asia that will never come. So that's wonderful. We want to continue to provide those opportunities. The biggest lie, the biggest myth that we tell ourselves is that we can do multitasking. We can do two things. We can do our regular job when we are virtual, and I can attend this conference because it's virtual, right? That's just a lie. Like nobody that I know actually does. In fact, we do neither of them. We do to neither of them a good service, right? So the issue here, it's commitment. It's if you are attending virtually, then we need to tell ourselves, we need to tell other people, look, this is when I'm attending the conference. I'm not going, maybe set those automatic email replies or whatever people do when they travel in person and say, I'm going to be away from my regular day job, and I'm going to be committed to attend the talks, engage with people virtually. So that's the issue. That's the heart of it. Is commitment is saying for this week, although I'm at my home, I'm not at my home. I'm with the people in spirit, and intellectually I'm engaged and with the people who are attending virtually from all over the world and people who are in a hybrid experience. And we need to stop lying ourselves that I can do whatever I'm doing on my day job and I'm also attending the virtual event.
But you do know the joke about physical conferences, right? I mean, it's just a room full of people doing their email. And and this is not an actual joke. I mean, I think people brag about doing their email in a physical conference, and and they're only there to do their email in the physical conference and go to the hallway to chat with their friends.
Also, I've actually sent email to people who have their laptop open. I open up my laptop, say, why aren't you paying attention to the conference? Close my laptop. And then after a minute, you say like, oh shit. And then you see them close their laptop. So they're even reading it. It's not like that's literally what they're doing.
Right. So I don't think we should be too nostalgic about physical conferences either, right? I mean, we can improve those. I mean, we have done experiments with events where laptops should be closed during talks, and they're very hard for attendees, right? I mean, especially senior people in the community. Giannis.
So I agree with lots of things that were said, but let me disagree a little bit. I think that even though we are PL people, we are intent right now on optimizing on the uncommon case and not the common case. And we should be optimizing the common case. And the common case is not conferences. Conferences are by nature very uncommon. First of all, we are exceptional people. I'm sorry to say it.
You mean uncommon in science, or?
They are uncommon. No, I didn't mean that. I mean they are uncommon as a reason for travel. They are uncommon as a mode of seeing people. They are not the usual business meeting. We are a small minority of business travel. We are rare people that have the luxury to travel. It's going to become even more of a luxury in the future because travel is about to get much more expensive, and it's going to get much more expensive because fewer people will travel, because all sorts of businesses have started realizing that they can do other things without physical meetings. And with every business on the planet realizing that they can do business without physically meeting, we are trying to not meet for the one thing that does benefit from physical meetings and benefits greatly. So conferences are exceptional for all the reasons that we discussed, that you need a shift of time zone. It's a meeting where we don't set the time. All of the productive virtual meetings are meetings that I've scheduled on my own time, not that someone else has scheduled whenever they want. I'm sorry, I haven't had in 2 years a single productive meeting, including multiple virtual conferences, where someone else has set the time and I have not agreed. This afternoon, I was giving a talk at the time when I was normally lecturing at my university. Guess what? I didn't cancel my lecture. I just didn't go to my talk. I showed up for 5 minutes in my Q&A. And conferences are rare. Of course, we're going to cut down on travel. Of course, we're not going to be going to 4 conferences a year in the future. Even those of us, those people who can afford it financially, I think we're going to cut down a bit. But it is an exception. So I think the exception, it's going to go on as it did before. For the most part, maybe we're going to have some virtual attendees. We're going to have some hybrid component. Maybe we're going to get high quality panelists, high quality invited speakers, if we give them the ability to present virtually. But for the most part, my prediction is that conferences may become sparser, but will stay around, but other business travel will diminish. That's just a prediction, and as always, very hard to predict, especially the future.
Could I make a counterpoint to that when you're done? Sorry. Here, I'm physically present at the conference, and I'm nostalgic for physical conferences, even being here, because and that what worries me is that we'll have these physical conferences, and they will no longer be physical conferences with a virtual presence. There'll be virtual conferences where maybe local people or somebody will be physically present, because I really haven't felt this to be a normal physical conference, despite the heroic efforts. I've spent a lot of time sitting up in my hotel room, connected virtually, because I could get more involved. I mean, I'm
over a bad network.
I was able to be more involved virtually at the physical conference than a lot of the physical sessions because of some of the issues, and because, where do you go on Discord, or do you need to be on the Zoom chat, or it was just easier to be in my room. And once I did that, it was like a virtual conference. And then I had work constantly intruding because I had my laptop up. I couldn't close it, right? People look at email, but every once in a while you can close your laptop and say, I want to pay attention. If you're a virtual, you're not. Your laptop's open, you're attached, and it's very easy for work to intrude. And suddenly you're trying to multitask. And my worry is that with the virtual option being true, having hybrid conferences, they'll become more and more optimized for the virtual. You'll get less and less benefit of the physical.
Right. You know that YouTube has
I doubt that, but you may be right.
YouTube has a full screen opportunity, right?
Can we also hear Benjamin's views? He has been pioneer in creating the first virtual versions of the conferences.
Yeah, he's up almost next. You're all?
Yeah, so what I think is very important is that we continue to experiment a lot. I mean, we've had a lot of experience now in virtual conferences, but not almost, I mean, very, very little so far on hybrid. And even with virtual conferences, there's so much more to improve. So I think we need to try out many different things, both for local smaller events and for larger ones. And we could also try out these have local hubs that where you meet, go somewhere, so you're actually physically at the hub and meet the people there, even if you're not going all the way to the other side of the earth. So, and simply mean that we need to continue experimenting, and yeah, that's what I wanted to say.
All right, Benjamin.
Yeah, so I think that I broadly agree with that last statement, in that the way that I see it is that a lot of
that's a different Benjamin, but go ahead.
Sorry, I apologize.
No, fine, go ahead. Make your point.
I want to sort of broadly echo that last point, and I think that a lot of the problems that we're having here with hybrid conferencing, in a sense, mirror the problems that we had the first time we went virtual, in a sense. And that I think that what's happening here is that we sort of knew what we were doing with a physical conference. We then had a bunch of virtual conferences that went sort of poorly, and we fiddled around with them until we kind of figured out how to make them work. And now what we have is the first hybrid conference, where we have both a physical conference and a virtual conference running at the same time. And while we can sort of make a physical conference work and sort of make a virtual conference work, how to get that intersection working isn't clear. And I think that we're going to, again, much like virtual, have some pretty interesting experiences, let's say, in the interim. Technologically, the way that I see the role of the technology here is that, at least I or whomever replaces me, because this is the last conference I'm doing, is going to, our role here is to facilitate the humans. We should be, from the technology perspective, the way that I approach this is that my answer should always be yes. I should never say you should not be able to do something. I might have to say, okay, you can't do this, but you can do this, but there are some restrictions on it. But the goal of the technology is to make the social interaction happen, is to make the humans who are involved have a good experience and understand what's happening and understand what's going on. So the way that I see it is that the way that we should look at this going forward is, let's try to come up with a social interaction that works, and then let's craft the technology around that. So in some senses, don't worry about me or video or technology. We can solve technology problems. Let's think about the social problems. Anyway, I apologize for interjecting because I'm the wrong Benjamin.
That's fine. You're probably the right Benjamin, but I meant Benjamin Pierce.
Yes, thank you. I apologize, first of all, for no camera. It seems to be not working today. And I have, of course, a whole bunch of things to say. This is a really, really interesting conversation. A lot of it actually echoes what Gurl just contributed, and Ben also. So I think the most important thing to recognize is that we are not at the end of any experiment with virtual conferences or hybrid conferences. We are absolutely right at the beginning still. And so, you know, as I posted in the Zoom chat, physical computer science conferences have had 50 years to figure out how to do it in a way that people like. And virtual conferences have had 18 months, and hybrid conferences have had a week. So we're really just beginning.
But you can also say that, I mean, it was time for physical conferences to get a reset, right? I mean,
yeah, absolutely,
weren't necessarily
absolutely.
Ideal.
Absolutely, but I would agree with lots of people that they had become pretty good. So I think physical conferences have had plenty of time to mature. In the virtual and hybrid domain, I would say that the technology is just now catching up with the basic fundamental requirements. And lots of people have found out over the last 18 months, the other Ben is one, I'm another, have found out that building a virtual conference platform that really does its job is very hard. There are a lot of moving parts. So I would say now that the basic tools for fully virtual are kind of there. The fundamental requirements are being met, but issues like, how do you get the same sense of presence? How do you network with people? How do you find new people? Things like this are real questions for research. They're hard. And so we have a lot of work to do, but I also feel that we are very far from topping out and reaching the limit of what we can do. So the technology has a long way to go, and I think will still go a long way. Where it will wind up, we'll have to see. But equally important to the technology is the human organization. The physical conferences are not just the physical, you know, hotel room or whatever. They are all of the social conventions that we've built up and the understanding among the organizers of how to put things together so that the flow works, and so on and so on. So the organizational and the social and the human aspects of virtual and hybrid are things that we know equally little about as the technological aspects, where we are really still taking baby steps there. A lot of hard work is going into these things. I think there's a lot of progress to be made, but it's going to take time. And so my conclusion from this, and sorry, one more point, is that there are lots of sort of pros and cons tugging us in all directions. There's the joy of seeing people physically and getting to spend longer, less formal time with them. There's the recognition that virtual conferences are much cheaper, that they can include people from parts of the world that would have trouble getting there, even with time zone issues, that they can be much more accessible than physical conferences. And yet, you know, there's the difficulty of getting away from families. And so we just feel tugged in every direction. And so my conclusion from all of this is that we just need to stay light on our feet. We need to plan to keep experimenting, keep figuring out what we like, what we don't like, keep trying to balance all of the different concerns. And where we wind up in 5 years or 10 years is going to be very different from where we are now, or possibly where we can imagine that we would want to get.
Wow.
End of long comment.
Lecture. End of lecture.
Sorry.
That's fine. Yeah, I mean, so we have learned about new tools, right? In this with this experience, and I think you were trying to get us to adopt some of those or develop some of those before, and now it's thrown in your lap, I suppose. Yeah, I mean, you didn't say efficient. You didn't include efficient in your list of properties, and I think you now can have an hour or so conversation with someone on the other side of the world, and before you would have thought that you would have to fly there. And so I do think we have discovered new ways of working, and we can extend that to conferences as well. Stefan.
Yeah, difficult to follow what Benjamin was saying. I just have a couple of comments, I suppose. I was really struck by what Yanis said, which I think I can agree with, that we are exceptional. And even when, so I'm very climate conscious and carbon conscious and whatnot, and I have a rule of not flying within Europe and all this sort of thing. But even so, in the old days, I would happily justify one long haul trip a year, which was normally going to Splash, because I feel like, well, it's my job to be somehow internationally engaged at a high level. And that's sort of one of those things that really, if anything can justify long distance travel, then that's one of them. And yes, that's one comment. The other one is about hybrid events. I really want to salute SPLASH for going hybrid this year. I think it's a brave experiment and a very important one. And as various people have said, we're only at the beginning. And it's funny because I'm not normally the person who has a lot of faith in, that technology is going to sort all the problems out and be wonderful. But I do see a lot of potential in hybrid. But then I think we need to drill down a little bit on what do we mean by hybrid. The issue came up in one of the comments in the room about, does it end up being virtual inside of physical or physical inside of virtual? And I think that design space is quite fascinating. I personally would like to see us thinking more about how to build virtual presence into a physical space, but that's easier said than done. So I hope we'll be able to do a lot of research and a lot of new experiments to work on all those issues.
All right. So we've been discussing virtual versus physical versus hybrid, right? As these are the choices that we have. And but I also think we can combine these, right? So we can have some physical events and some online events and some hybrid events, and have multiple events in a year, and not all of them have to be physical, and not as we used to be in the past. But we can use these online tools as well for some events. We ran out of raised hands. So how about this idea of having, so now you submit a a talk to a conference, and then you go there, and that is so both the publication and
Elko, I don't know if you can see, but somebody was standing and waving in Zurich's.
I see it. So I will give, but let me raise this point. So so currently, conference equals publication, right? So you submit a paper to a conference, and then when it's accepted, you go there and you present it, and that is the and it's published in the proceedings or the journal now, and those events coincide. And but you could also think about well, you could have multiple presentations, right? I mean, just giving a talk once is not so great for impact, and separating that from the publication somewhat. And so we could have regional events where you present your paper, and maybe an author gives their paper at or presents their paper at multiple events. But then the audience doesn't always have to go to the remote event. Is that something that chimes with this panel? Earl?
Yeah, I think it's a good idea to have, in general, this trend towards more journal-like publications where you have a conference committee that and deadlines like 2 or 3 times a year, as many conferences now have and are moving towards, and that you have this possibility to present your paper at perhaps a conference of your choice. Like I think ICUP and UPSLA are starting to collaborate in this way. So that you don't necessarily have to go very, very far, but you can present your paper at a more local event if that suits you. And so that kind of flexibility, I think, could be very helpful.
Right. And so when you could choose the event to present at, but you could also present at multiple events, right? So that sort of local audiences could see your presentation rather than just the presentation that is of the conference that happens to be local to them. So the room wanted to say something.
Yeah, so I had a response to something Benjamin put in the chat. He made a good point that he and others did an analysis of the effect of, say, one big conference on climate change, and found that it might be less than you expect because many people only attend one conference anyway. I guess I would flip that around a little bit, and I would say let's look at the human effect of one big conference. One benefit of that is it can be scheduled at a time when more people can travel. For many of us, that's summer because many of us are in academia. We can see all the people we want to see in one conference, and so those of us who might otherwise, some of us do go to more than one conference a year, but those of us could, in that situation, could reduce our travel. So there might be some benefits, but I think really it's getting more out of what travel we do, and I think that's something that helps humans and helps the climate ultimately as well. It's really win-win. So I would love to see some explorations of that, and I'd echo those who say there's an important integration between the hallway track and the technical presentations. Technical presentations inspire hallway, but also Shurem spread his experience as a grad student, and I certainly remember my first UPSLA being kind of a very quiet student volunteer. But also when I was a more senior student, the experience of having your moment in the sun and giving that talk, on a paper from your thesis, it's amazing, right? And then people come after you afterwards and talk, and you become part of that hallway conversation. So there's the wonderful side of that, I think, as well, that maybe your very first conference is hard to see, but you get into it, and when you have a paper to present and so on, that really means a lot to students. So I would love to see experimentation with a mega conference that could bring us all, get all the travel done at once, and see everyone.
Thanks. Is there more in the room?
So this is Uday Rajan. I just wanted to make a couple of comments here. So first, I think this is one of the aspects that has not been raised so far. So I wanted to raise it because I have some personal experience with it. I organized the first virtual splash and now doing the first hybrid splash and the first ACM. One thing to consider is the load on the general chair. I can tell you this, that you will have difficulty finding people to do this job if you make it too complicated.
But we have you, Hridesh, so it sounds like we've solved that problem.
So I think that's a very important thing to consider, right? That folks are doing this on a volunteer basis. So it's really important to consider. Second is that, we have done enough of these now that a meta-analysis is due at the community level, at the SIG plan level, perhaps, about what are the minimal viable things that work and that we know how to do really well. And perhaps we can settle on how to do them so that we have good expertise around those features of the conference. I think that's really, really important because I think we do know that some things work really well and some other things on which you can experiment around. The third thing I wanted to bring up is that, I don't know, this has been encouraged. I also happen to be the chair of my department, so I actually encourage people to take leave when they attend virtual conferences. Because you are doing professional development activity, and you really should take a leave during that time to do that professional development activity. And you shouldn't really be doing your job and the professional development activity at the same time. And maybe this should become more of a norm in the community within ACM and outside as well, to treat virtual conferences in the same way that you would going to a physical conference. I think that will be very, very helpful. I definitely think that's something we should go. And finally, I wanted to say that we do have some experience now of combining papers from multiple conferences and giving authors an opportunity to present at one venue. So we are doing that as SPLASH already, right? I don't know whether many of you know about this, but there are papers from ICFP, there are papers from PLDI, and there are papers from USLA that are being presented at SPLASH this week. So we do have that, some experience with doing that already. And this might sound a little selfish on behalf of SPLASH, but I think SPLASH should continue to do that. SPLASH should continue to offer that opportunity to other conferences, other sister SIG plan conferences. And I would, at the risk of going out on a limb, I would say maybe SPLASH should become that one conference that every programming language person attends in future, and then papers are published at the other venues. Sorry, that was a little opinionated on SPLASH's behalf.
But so would you say, Hridesh, that then there's a single opportunity at which you present your paper, or do you do presentations at multiple conferences, or so? What is that? What is the model you envision?
So I envision that you do the virtual conferences like ICFP happened and the PLDI happened virtually, but then it becomes a personal choice then to go and present your conference paper at this venue if you really want to have an in-person presentation. So this becomes more of a I want to go to this conference and present that paper. Right, because when this choice was offered to PLDI, ICFP, and other previously presented conferences, not everybody took it, but there were many people who did take it, and they took the opportunity. So it becomes more presenting the paper again at this combined conference becomes kind of like a personal choice, right. And that allows folks to make that choice if they choose to do so. I think that might balance folks who, the need for folks who, for various reasons, don't want to make that choice. And that's okay.
Yeah, and so the language in the PAC-MPL call for papers now is papers or authors of accepted papers will be invited to present their paper, right? Rather than they're required to attend the conference. I mean, we're not trying to sell hotel rooms. We're not in that business. I mean, it's a privilege that you earn to get to present your paper, but you don't have to. I mean, if you want to skip that opportunity, then you can not do it. But I mean, that will be your loss, right? I mean, but it's not. We're not trying to sell seats in the conference. Kim, happy to see you here.
Hold on, I'm running the mic over.
Kim Bruce, I was. So Kim, we don't hear you. Kim?
Just to answer your question, I think what you're saying is that an individual can choose to not present their paper at all. But what I'm saying is a little bit different, is that an individual should always present at a virtual conference or virtual event, but they may not choose to present at a physical event.
Yeah, I think the invitation to present can be either virtual or physical, right? I mean, if you don't want to present at all, I mean, that is your choice. I don't think we should but it would be a privilege to get invited to present virtually and or physically.
Right. Thank you.
So Kim, can you?
Yes, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. I wanted to say a couple of things. First, watching technical lectures on Zoom sucks. And part of this is my trauma from having to teach via Zoom. What's even worse is having to watch it on a schedule. Because when we're virtual, we have all this stuff going on around us. And as people talked about, it's not just email, but classes, et cetera. So that's really hard. If we're going to do things virtually, I would really try to recommend that talks be made available for maybe a few days ahead of time, and then have a synchronized discussion. That would give people a chance to absorb more material along the way. That's a minor suggestion. The more major thing is, I know about half the people here who are showing up for this because I've attended conferences. And yet, looking at this hybrid conference, I haven't really been able to make contact with pretty much anybody. And I've been fighting with the technology, trying to go back and forth with Zoom and YouTube, and when I can ask a question and whether I do it on Discord, it's all confusing and difficult. PLDI did a little better, I think, this summer because you could wander around and talk to people in a virtual environment. But those social aspects, the fact that when you're sitting down and eating lunch or dinner with someone, that's where the deep discussions go on. Not just, I mean, there's the importance of friendships, but also the sharing of technical ideas. And I've found in my own career, most collaborations start with something that happens at a conference. And that's a thing that we're really lacking here. So I'm hoping we can figure out some way around that. I'd like to see, this is probably my last conference because last Splash because I'm retiring at the end of December, though I hope to make it to things that are close to me. But I think we need some things in person, and otherwise we need to figure out how to virtualize those accidental connections and those conversations.
Right.
Thanks.
So Kim, how do you like this session?
This particular session seems to work pretty well. The other sessions I found frustrating, partially because the calendar keeps giving me wrong times and times for talks. I'm trying to come to the off sync because I'm a couple of hours off, try to attend things in the evening. I've been disappointed at the attendance. Luca Cardelli's talk today, which I thought was fantastic, seemed to have very few people on YouTube or in person. So I realize it's a heroic effort, and I applaud those who've put the effort into this, but I think we're still a long way from where we need to be. I think smaller things work better.
Right.
I think the programming language design workshops, I think work pretty well because it's a small group. But I think when you've got, several hundred people, it doesn't work as well.
Yeah, so the point I wanted to make is if you make an effort to invite a bunch of people together in Zoom, you can have a pretty decent conversation that is not unlike a conversation you would have at a big lunch table at a conference restaurant, right? I mean, one person talks at a time, and you can all listen, and actually more people can listen in if they want to, right? So if you make a bit of an effort, you can have close to an interactive conversation. But these sort of pre-canned talks may be good in quality, but they lack in the interactivity that you get from live, basically, right? Where you can interrupt. Now, please interrupt me when someone is rambling, right? All right, Sriram or Kim.
Let's go, Jonathan. I've spoken before.
Okay.
I can wait.
Jonathan.
Yeah. Hello. Okay.
This John. That one.
Yes.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Pascal Amuso a graduate student from Purdue. Yeah, it's been an interesting conversation so far and an interesting conference. Yeah, being at a physical conference has really helped me interact with other graduate students and discuss my ongoing or intending research with them and get ideas and views from them. And really, I may not have really gotten the opportunity if it was a purely virtual conference based on what we have discussed so far. But yeah, I always see virtual conference as a way of improving access to these conferences. So what I'm trying to say is, if I'm a student, I'm probably earning like student stipend. If this conference was anywhere outside Chicago, outside the Midwest, the probability of me attending, if I was not going to make a presentation, was very slim, very, very slim. So, but with a virtual conference, yeah, while we keep trying to make it better, it gives me that access. But then I want to make a point. So during on Wednesday yesterday, when we were during the opening session, I've forgotten her name, but she made a presentation about the papers and what countries they came from, or the top countries that submitted papers and that were accepted. And from observation, which may be wrong, there seems to be a very, very low contributions from the African community in Africa, not outside Africa, in Africa. I see virtual conferences as a way of actually getting Africans involved. A lot of Africans have issues like funding travels to another African country, like not talk of coming to the US or to watch where they're not presenting. But with increased virtual conferences, and yeah, I'm also a supporter of watch parties. And what I mean by watch parties is typically a conference may be holding in Amsterdam in the Netherlands, and then we have a watch party here in Chicago. And probably schools, Michigan, Purdue, Iowa State, schools around the Midwest can come to Chicago and participate in the, at least most students here from Purdue, Michigan, Iowa State, around, can come together and participate in the same conference. Such watch parties, if extended to, let's say, Africa, so probably we have a watch party in Lagos, and academic researchers around Nigeria, Ghana could actually participate in Lagos in these conferences. I guess it will help increase the submission, contributions of African researchers to getting them involved at the very least. Thank you.
Thanks. Jonathan Bell.
Thanks. Thank you very much. Again, let me just reiterate, everyone who participated in the organization of the entire conference and the panel today, this is truly a very great event to be able to participate in. This is a problem that I've been thinking about for quite a while as well. And I think that when thinking about what hybrid and virtual is in the future, we really should revisit what our overall goal is with a conference and what our goal is with a hybrid or virtual conference. I think that now that in particular we have PACM-PL, the answer is not that conferences are the place that we publish our papers. Really, conferences are the place that we present papers maybe. The reason that we present them is that we have something to talk about to network. Like as Sriram mentioned, you could just put a bunch of people in a hallway, but if there's not a paper to talk about, it's what are you going to talk about? So I think it's really about community. And looking at what I have personally felt were the most successful kinds of virtual interactions I've had, they're the kinds of interactions that are not possible in a physical space. They're not the ones that say, let's try to replicate the physical space online, but you say, you know what, let's do speed networking and just tell people, come and say hi, and you'll meet someone new. And you'll meet someone new that you couldn't have met in a physical space because they wouldn't have been there. Setting up different kinds of mentoring programs and things like this. I'm really, really interested in looking forwards to what other kinds of new interactions maybe we can design that maybe don't represent what we do physically at a conference, but can still maybe draw people together and keep building a broader community. No answers, just questions.
That can also be somewhat scary, right? I mean, so I mean, not just, I mean, so it can be scary in the sense of just meeting someone. I mean, say I'm shy, but also, well, I'm spending my next hour in this conference. Do I want to talk to some random person, right? I mean, how efficient is that? And yeah, and that can be. And if you're happen to stand in line for coffee and you meet someone, well, I mean, you're standing there anyway, so that is but that makes it easier to spend that time.
I'm sorry, my point was that those interactions are better than nothing, and there are things that weren't possible otherwise. We still don't know exactly how to do this, entirely at scale.
I agree, but when I see myself thinking about shall I join that coffee room channel, then I think I can also have some real coffee, or right? I mean, yeah. Kim, your hand is still raised, but maybe Sriram, go ahead.
Yeah, it's an idea I floated a long time ago and got no traction, but I think we may be in a better position to talk about this, since it's related to something Amal also mentioned in her comment about the reviewing load, right? Our papers have gotten like fatter and fatter and fatter, and it's more and more work. And we don't yet have this problem in PL quite as much the way like security has it, where it's like basically blatant abuse of the review system. Right? You submit a paper, you get a rejection, and literally a week later or 4 days later, there's another conference deadline. So obviously there's no time to read anything. You just like resubmit the damn thing. And over time, what that leads to is the review quality goes down. It's like, because this person's not going to do anything. They're just going to resubmit the rejection, right? And there's been a race to the bottom, I think, in a lot of review quality over there. And we don't have that yet, but I worry that as the papers get bigger, that's going to start happening. Amal, you seem to want to say something about that.
Yes, I completely agree with that. But I think that over the last 18, 19 months, our online reviewing, maybe it's the fact that PC meetings are no longer in person, but I think that it's both the length of the paper. Reviewers are sort of, overworked, overwhelmed, whatever. But it's also that nobody is reading. Only three people now read that review. We don't have in-person PC meetings. Maybe we should use our virtual platforms to do Zoom PC meetings.
Well, so I want to propose something bigger, right? So there's now, there's also, we're increasingly moving to this multi-phase thing. But the thing I've been trying to propose is something more like a matching event, right? So you submit there's like, look, we're all on PCs all the time right now anyway, but except we're like, half the time we're declining, and then we're like on the PC, but even when you're not on the PC, you're doing all this reviewing. So what if we were to say like, look, you're on the PC for the year. Like, I think the programming community does this really nicely, but it's a tiny, tiny event. But the idea is you're signing up for a year, roughly speaking, right? And all the reviewing, and you get multiple rounds and revisions and all of that good stuff. And we can take like, OOPSLA this year has this like thing that's so confusing, I barely understand it, about rounds within rounds and rounds within rounds within rounds and so on. But, something of that sort. You submit, but you also indicate, these are the places I'm willing to have my work be presented, right? And PC members can decide, well, this work can appear at these places or not that places. Sort of there's a matching process. And then your eventual presentation can be, or even it's just submitted to PACM-PL, like it's literally just a PACM-PL paper. It is not associated with any physical conference at all. And then the physical conference is just a venue where you can show up and meet people and give a talk. And
are you saying, Sriram, that you're on the PACM-PL board review?
You're on the PACM-PL review board for about a year, and then you rotate off and you get to take a 2-year break or something like that, and you come back on.
Right, but it's for all the issues.
All the conferences that are willing to sign up to PACM-PL, right? And even something like, in principle, something like eCoop could also decide if it wants to join, whatever. But we can share this resource, because otherwise we do have this problem where once it's rejected, you're going to start all over again. right? New reviewers, new this, new that. It doesn't lead to better papers, just leads to a lot of wasted effort, right? So let's dissociate the reviewing part from the publishing part, from the presenting part. And finally, we're making progress on that. We have a PACM-PL, which is the publishing part, right? Associate the reviewing, and now we separate the presenting, and you can say, I want to present this year because this is near to me and I can show up there, or I have to go to the US anyway, I have to go to North America, I might as well go show up over there. I think we have an opportunity to also change that dynamic and make it so that we don't end up abusing the community and just like leading to bad reviewers and crappy everything.
Right. Amal, do you want to say something about the UPSLA process? And
you mean reviewing process?
Yes.
Well, so
Sriram seems to be confused.
Well, I'm not that confused. I'm sorry. It came out too negative. It's actually a positive. Sorry.
Okay, I just want to say that overall I agree with Sriram. I think that it would be there's a lot of different factors going on right now, I think, in terms of online PCs and all of that. So I'll go back to the comment I made at the very beginning about junior people and online conferences. I feel like junior people and online PCs are a really bad thing. Like our junior people aren't learning how to review, and they're not benefiting from being on a PC because only 2 other people who reviewed that paper are going to read your review. So the reputational benefits that you got from writing a really good review no longer happen. So that's like about the dynamic.
Was that really different with physical PC meetings?
Well, maybe I idealize this, or maybe I'm not being too nostalgic, but I felt that, when we had in-person PC meetings and everyone, every paper got presented, the Guardian would summarize and then the other 2 would speak up. There was at least an opportunity, maybe not 30 people.
And the rest of the room was reading their email, right?
Oh, come on. Half the people were listening. Half the people were listening. The other half were reading the email, but half the people were listening.
But at least half the people were listening. And that was powerful. That was great. Or even if 6 or 7 people were listening, come on, that's enough, right? It led to moments of people speaking up and, either positively or negatively bringing in connections with other work. And that was great. And we got to know our more junior people on the PCs better that way, right? And we don't give them the opportunities for us senior people to get to know them that way anymore. So I think there's a lot of work to be done on that front as well. But I agree with Sriram. I also think that the other thing happening is that right now there's too much of a sense in the SIGPLAN universe of POPL and PLDI being the prize, and people are super cutthroat on that front. It's not healthy. I think reviews are getting negative. People are feeling dissociated from each other. They're just sitting, we've been siloed for 19 months. It's gotten worse. I don't know, I'm being very negative, but I'm kind of worried about a lot of this.
I think it's important. I think the only thing that'll be saddened by this is like csrankings.org. Everyone else will probably improve their mental health.
I agree. And improving mental health will be a very good thing in terms of again, future. The pandemic has also had an effect on junior people in the field. And I think that they're feeling more disconnected, obviously. So.
Sophia.
So I think that what you proposed, Sriram, is wonderful, and it fits very well with the new model that UPSLA is going to be running now with Jan and Amal. You probably know it, but for the others, if a paper gets rejected from UPSLA, then it has to stay out for a year. It can be invited to, if it is good enough but not perfect, then it can be invited to submit again in half a year. So what you are suggesting is we apply it to the whole community, which makes total sense, because I could get my paper rejected from UPSLA and then I try for, say, POPL. I think it's a wonderful idea.
And you get continuity of reviewers and the cooling off period if they say you're abusing the system, chill out.
Yeah.
It's an excellent idea.
It's difficult to organize, but it's a good idea.
But what Sriram proposes is even more radical, right? I mean, there's a single reviewing process for PACM-PL papers, basically, and there's a joint editorial board for all the issues. And so I think what some people worry about is that there's a certain community associated with each of these conferences, and they have a different sort of sensitivity of what they like. I mean, you don't send the same paper to ICFP as you send to Popple, as you send to UPSLA, and maybe that that culture should be not be. I mean, it would populify everything, right? I mean, if you would have a single that is a danger that some people see, and so that's something to look out for, I think. So you want to keep that. But yes, I mean, so I think an idea of this new UPSLA reviewing approach is that there are multiple moments in the year. So if you missed that one moment, then you don't have to wait for a year to submit your paper. And right, Ed.
Hi, wanted to make a comment about this discussion has turned interestingly to the issues about submitting papers to a conference. And I'll admit, I come to these conferences primarily to listen to papers. I used to submit a lot to UPSLA. These days, I'm from industry. I come to learn about research. One of the things also that worries me with the virtual format is that it is easier for industry people to attend virtually. So the conferences, the people who come, based on the discussion we're just having, there's going to be a lot of people who come because they can justify it because they're presenting a paper. You'll get a bunch of people physically that are just the presenters presenting to themselves. Everybody else will be coming virtually. And I know working on conferences, it's really hard to attract, it's getting harder to attract people from industry. One of the benefits of UPSLA and SPLASH is, you just see today, like this week at SLE, you've got industry and researchers working together. I'm worried that we will no longer have that kind of collaboration, that you'll end up with the focus we were just talking about how to get more people to submit, and they'll come because they're submitting, but you'll then get the other half of the community just attending virtually and not interacting and not getting that interaction we used to get in the past.
Okay, but some people also said, I mean, the importance of physical conferences is to actually meet people, and I think that also holds for industry people, right? And is that, do you feel that is you can justify visiting a conference?
I can, because I work for a small company and control my own budget. But a lot of people, even at larger companies, especially at larger companies, they are pulling back on travel because they're finding out they can say people attended a conference and get the credit for attending the conference and not have to pay for the travel. And if you have more and more hybrid conferences, and if the focus is on making it easy for people to submit and come if they submit, but then everybody else attend virtually, I think you lose that physical interaction. I think the plus is the industry will be able to be more involved. The minus is, I think the trend right now is for them to be more involved virtually, which I think in the end will be a negative.
I think as someone in industry, I think Giannis's point from an hour ago is a good one. Like we really, in business, we're discovering how to get a lot done without traveling all the time. And that's the reality. It's, there's certain things that don't work and you travel for that, but they're the exception, not the rule.
Yeah, I don't travel for business. I travel to go to conferences, actually. Yeah. All my business for years before the pandemic has been me sitting in my home office talking to people around the world, but I still made a point every year to go to 3 or 4 conferences to have the physical interaction. And now I'm not sure that's going to happen the way it used to. And I think that'll be a real loss.
Can you still justify that, Dave? Traveling to physical conferences?
Sure, to a certain degree, for the same reason anyone else can do it. It's like I have to present a paper, I have to do something. But I think it becomes much more of a, I mean, at least in my part of industry, I was never going to 4 or 5 conferences a year anyways. I was going to 1 or 2, right? So.
Right, and that's what some of us are proposing, right? I mean, we would have a big SECPLAN event that we would attend physically, and then have some additional virtual events where we go into technical stuff more deeply.
Right, but I think it does put pressure on the conference budgeting piece. If you're expecting lots of people from industry to come, that's going to be very hard.
In what sense?
Just if you sort of if your attendance, like to make the finances for the conference work, if you're assuming you're getting a certain percentage of people who are going to come and are going to pay full fare, you just got to change that.
Yeah, I mean, that's another aspect of the conference organization that we haven't talked about, right? The whole budgeting issue.
The American hotel industry would collapse, and my God, that would be so terrible. What would happen to Grand Ballroom B?
$50 for an extension cord, right?
So what's our time frame, Ilko?
I think we have gone nicely over time, so we're out of time probably. I don't know whether this Zoom room will be overtaken by some other session soon, but I assume so. I guess I also have to find out whether dinner is served here.
We're into lunch here in the conference zone, and the Zoom won't cut off. Benjamin has kindly extended the YouTube channel so people can
right.
still
I saw
watch,
that.
but,
That's very nice.
I know probably student volunteers and some of the panelists are getting hungry.
Yeah. I mean, you can walk out at any point, of course. I think this was a nice discussion. It was sprawling. We touched on lots of things and concluded very little. But I think I guess this is the point of the hallway track, right? I mean, we'll discuss in the Splash SC meeting how to take lessons from this discussion, I think. Yeah, thank you all for your participation, and see you in the next Zoom discussion, I guess.
Thank you, and thank you to the hybridization committee.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Great
Yes.
job, great job.
Yeah, and thanks also for organizing this, Elko.
Thank you for organizing, Elko.
Give me a good excuse to come to something.
Thanks for joining us in the middle of the night.
See ya.
Indeed.
All right.
Thank you.
See you, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thank you, Ilko.